an all-out war between independence and power. It began with the simmering disputes based in history and identity, and was sparked by Russia's full-scale invasion in 2022. Ukrainian ambition for independence and Western relations clashed with Putin's desire for power and influence. A global impact on food and energy prices persist. Millions of people have fled their homes and cities lie in ruins. Join us as we uncover events of the 21st century's most groundbreaking territorial dispute, the Russo-Ukrainian War. What are the countries involved? Ukraine has always been a neutral zone between the Collective Security System Organization or CSTO of the East and the North Atlantic Treaty Organization of the West, making it a core interest of Russia. With this, several nations wanted to set their hands upon the conflict. The countries that supported Russia are Belarus, Syria, North Korea, and the countries remaining neutral or abstain are China, India, and South Africa. Belarus has allowed Russia to stage troops and equipment on its territory and has provided logistical support for the invasion. Syria has voted against UN resolution condemning the invasion and has provided diplomatic support for Russia. North Korea has also voted against UN resolutions condemning the invasion and has made statements in support of Russia. China has not condemned the invasion but has also not endorsed it. It has called for a peace resolution for the conflict but has avoided taking sides. India has also called a peaceful resolution to the conflict but has abstained for voting UN resolutions condemning the invasion. South Africa has taken a similar position to India, calling for a peaceful resolution and abstaining from voting on UN resolutions.
The conflict between Russia and Ukraine war takes place within Ukraine's borders, but it has several key focal points. The main areas of conflict are eastern Ukraine, southern Ukraine, northern Ukraine, and the Black Sea. Eastern Ukraine has been in conflict since 2014 with Russian-backed separatists controlling parts of the Donbas region. Russian forces have made significant advances in southern Ukraine, capturing key cities like Kherson and Mariupol. While Russian forces initially attempted to capture the capital of Ukraine, Kyiv, they were ultimately repelled. However, sporadic shelling and missile attacks still occur in northern Ukraine. Both sides control parts of the Black Sea, making it a potential flashpoint for further conflict.
Let us now talk about historical background. 1920s to 1930s. Stalin's rule in the Soviet Union led to forced resettlement and deportation of ethnic minorities, particularly Ukrainians, from border regions to remote Soviet Union regions. This resulted in immense suffering, loss of life, and suppression of Ukrainian identity and autonomy, ultimately causing immense suffering and loss of life for the Ukrainian people. Let us go back to December 1922, where the conflict between the two territories fired up. The Soviet Union was established through the Treaty on the Creation of the USSR, signed by Russia, Ukrainian, Belarusian, and Transcaucasian Soviet Socialist Republics. It was founded on the Marxism and Leninism principles to create a classless society through socialism and communism. Lenin and Joseph Stalin led the Soviet Union through industrialization, collectivization of agriculture, and social and political challenges. However, this period also saw authoritarian rule, political repression, and human rights abuses. Fast forward 69 years later. December 1991, the USSR collapsed. Why? What happened? First is the crisis of authority. A power vacuum and political instability resulted from Gorbachev's reforms, which also diminished the influence of the Communist Party and the central government. The Communist Party undermined the legitimacy of the Soviet leadership by opposing Gorbachev's reforms and attempting to launch a coup in August 1991. Economic problems. Among the many problems the Soviet economy faced were inefficiency, stagnation, and lack of innovation. Production inefficiencies and frequent shortages of consumer products were caused by the command economies and centralized planning. Political reforms. Opposition movements grew stronger in the Soviet Union as a result of Gorbachev's political changes, especially the introduction of glasnost and democratization initiatives. The Soviet Union's unity was jeopardized, and the Communist Party's power was diminished by the relaxation of political control. Nationalism and ethnic tensions. Ethnic tensions and conflicts escalated, particularly in regions such as Baltic states, Ukraine, and the Caucasus. Lastly, international factors. The Soviet Union faced growing Western pressure, including the US and NATO, to contain and weaken it. The arms race and economic strain of maintaining military parity with the West exacerbated the Soviet Union's economic issues.
2013 was when Ukraine had an association agreement with the European Union, but before a signing event could even take place, the country held back, choosing to strengthen their ties with Russia instead, thus causing the Maidan Revolution. Protesters roamed the streets demanding the agreement to be signed. In response, the president took hundreds of lives, driving him out of the office and off the country. The pro-Russian president was Putin's only way of political control over Ukraine. With him being out of the office, it leaves the Russian president with no choice but to use force.
The Crimean Crisis.
It was March 2014, a month after the Maidan Revolution. Groups of armed mass soldiers appeared in the streets of Crimea. They were known as the Little Green Men. They surrounded the whole peninsula, and then later on, Russia had fully invaded Crimea and annexed it. 25,000 Ukrainian military personnel were evacuated. The invasion became the largest attack on a European country since World War II.
War of Donbass. Just a month after the invasion in Crimea, a pro-Russian separatist group appeared in the Donbass region, storming government buildings. The conflict was intensified. Ukrainian forces tried their best to retain their territorial integrity, but the invaders moved beyond their borders, not to mention that it was largely a Russian-populated area. Soon after, the separatists of Donetsk and Luhansk proclaimed their independence. Despite the presence of the same Green Men armed with Russian weaponry, along with other growing evidences, Putin still denied their involvement. After these two significant events, both sides had finally had enough. More media rows were recorded. 14,000 people were killed, and 2 million people had been displaced. This led to a ceasefire. February 12, 2015, a ceasefire agreement, Minsk Protocol II, was agreed. This was sufficient for the countries to take a break, but Putin made sure to hold on tight upon Crimea and Donbass in order to keep Ukraine from moving further to the west. In November 2021, the dispute was reignited, and the second phase of the war had been developed. January 2022, satellite images had captured over 100,000 Russian troops and war equipment on standby along the borders of Ukraine. Putin denied this, but began to voice out his demands upon NATO. He wished for NATO to put an end to their expansion, that they should go back to where they were in 1997, away from Russia. He also demanded Ukraine be barred from ever joining the military alliance. Of course, this had been denied. In February 2022, Russia launched a full-scale invasion of Ukraine and began occupying more of the country. The United Nations passed a resolution condemning the invasion and demanding a full Russian withdrawal in 2022. The International Court of Justice ordered Russia to suspend their military operations, and the Council of Europe expelled Russia. By June 2022, Russian troops occupied about 20% of Ukrainian territory. Russia forces subsequently invaded Ukraine. The invasion was internationally condemned. Many countries imposed sanctions against Russia and increased existing sanctions. From August 2022, Ukrainian forces began recapturing territories in the northeast and south. In late September 2022, Russia declared the annexation of 4 partially occupied regions of Ukraine, which was internationally condemned. In spring 2023, Russia dug into positions ahead of another Ukrainian counteroffensive, which failed to gain significant ground. The war has resulted in a refugee crisis and tens and thousands of deaths. Extensive environmental damage caused by the war, widely described as an ecocide, the mass destruction of nature by humans, contributed to food crisis worldwide. As you can see shown in the map, the yellow are the areas continuously controlled by Ukraine. The red ones are occupied by Russia, while the blue ones were recaptured by Ukraine from Russia. Peace is sought through diplomatic channels, but the outcome depends on what happens on the battlefield, how serious both sides are about their positions, and whether the world community can come up with a long-term solution. As of now, the Russia-Ukraine war has no clear result or end in sight. It remains to be unresolved. We hope this report sparked your curiosity. Now go forth and explore the world with a new perspective. Stay tuned for the next chapter in this unfolding story.